July 28, 1943. The humid dawn breaks over the churning waters of the Huon Gulf, off the northeastern coast of New Guinea. You're strapped into the cockpit of a B-25 Mitchell bomber, the roar of twin-right Cyclone engines vibrating through your bones as the aircraft schemes just 50 feet above the waves. Salt spray flecks the windshield, and the metallic tang of gun oil mixes with the acrid scent of aviation fuel. Major Paul Pappy Gunn, a grizzled 43-year-old with a mustache like a broom and eyes sharpened by years of tinkering in combat, grips the control yoke tightly. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Ed Larner, scans the horizon through binoculars, his knuckles white on the armrests. Below, the sea is a treacherous mosaic of turquoise and foam, hiding coral reefs that could rip the belly out of any plane daring too low. But today, you're not just bombing, you're hunting. The radio crackles to life in your headset. Bandits sighted, bearing 0-20 degrees, 2 miles out. Japanese destroyer, looks like a Mitsuki class, with a smaller escort trailing. Gunn's voice is steady, but there's an edge to it, like a man about to pull the trigger on a loaded bet. All right, boys, this is what we've been building for. Load the cannon, make it count. In the nose, the bombardier gunner, Sergeant Harlan Hank Thompson, hefts a 14-pound high-explosive shell into the breech of the massive 75mm M4 cannon, a beast of a gun ripped from Army field artillery and bolted into the bomber's snout. It's a Frankenstein creation, this plane, dubbed Lil Fox after Gunn's daughter, with its plexiglass nose replaced by a solid metal fairing. For .50 caliber machine guns cluster around the cannon like angry hornets, and extra armor plating that makes the B-25 feel like it's lugging a tank through the sky. The destroyer comes into view now, a sleek gray Predator slicing through the water at 30 knots, its 4.7-inch gun swiveling toward you. Anti-aircraft fire erupts, puffs of black smoke blooming in the air, shrapnel whistling past the wings. You feel the plane shudder as gun banks hard to starboard, lining up for the run. Steady, steady, he mutters. The altimeter needle hovers dangerously low, one wrong gust, and you're skipping across the waves like a stone. Thompson peers through the optical sight, his breath fogging the glass. The destroyer grows larger, its bridge alive with frantic Japanese sailors manning machine guns and torpedo tubes. This isn't high-altitude precision bombing. This is knife fight range, where you can see the fear in their eyes. Fire! Gun bellows. Thompson yanks the lanyard. The cannon booms with recoil that slams to the airframe like a sledgehammer, the entire plane lurching backward mid-flight. The 75mm shell arcs out, a streak of death hurtling toward the destroyer's hull. It strikes amidships with a deafening explosion. Water geysers up, steel plating buckles, and flames lick the deck. But the ship doesn't slow. It veers, its guns barking back. Reload. Gun orders, pulling up slightly to evade the flak. The crew works feverishly. Shell casing ejects with a clang, another round chambered. The second shot roars out, smashing into the engine room. Black smoke billows, the destroyer listing now, its speed faltering. You can hear the cheers in the intercom over the engine drone. Direct hit! She's hurting. Yet the experts back home had called this suicide. North American aviation engineers had shaken their heads in horror when General George Kenney first floated the idea over a year ago. Mounting a cannon that size in a bomber? The recoil alone, they warned, would shear the rivets, crumple the fuselage, send the wings fluttering off like autumn leaves. It'll kill the pilot before it kills the enemy, one had scrawled in a report. But here you are, in the thick of it, the plane holding together through sheer willpower and Gunn's mad genius. A third shot thunders. This one tears into bridge, silencing a turret. The destroyer shudders, fires raging fore and aft. The escort ship peels away, but Lil Fox isn't done. Gun circles for another pass. The .50 calories chattering now, raking the deck with incendiary rounds. Sailors dive for cover as sparks dance across the superstructure. As the sun climbs higher, the destroyer wallows. Taking on water, its hull breached in multiple places. Gun pulls away. The B-25 climbing to 1,000 feet for safety. Below, the once mighty warship slips beneath the waves, oil slicks spreading like blood in the water. But how did it come to this? To understand, We must rewind to the dark days of early 1942, when the Pacific skies were a graveyard for American bombers, and a bold general dared to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare. In the sweltering heat of Brisbane, Australia, February 1942, the U.S. Army Air Forces were reeling. Japanese forces had swept the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies like a tsunami, their nimble destroyers and cruisers dodging bombs from high altitude with infuriating ease. 17 flying fortresses, designed for precision strikes from 20,000 feet, were dropping ordnance that might as well have been confetti. Hit rates hovered below 5% against moving ships, humiliating for pilots like Captain Donald Don Hall, who returned from sorties over a bow with empty bomb bays and full frustrations. "It's like trying to hit a mosquito with a slingshot," Hall grumbled in the officers' mess, nursing a warm beer amid the buzz of mosquitoes and the distant thunder of artillery. The doctrine was flawed from the start. Pre-war theorists had envisioned fleets of heavy bombers pulverizing enemy navies from the safety of the clouds. But reality bit hard. Japanese destroyers, with their high maneuverability and fierce anti-aircraft screens, twisted and turned, rendering northern bomb sites useless. Losses mounted. Planes shot down, crews captured or lost at sea. Morale plummeted as supply lines stretched thin. Spare parts scarce, and the Europe First policy siphoned resources to the Atlantic. Enter Lieutenant General George Churchill Kenny, a no-nonsense MIT graduate with a penchant for innovation and a hatred for bureaucracy. Appointed commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific in August 1942, Kenny arrived like a storm front, purging inefficient officers and demanding results. Kenny's eyes lit up when he met Major Pappy Gunn, a former Navy enlisted man-turned-Army officer, whose mechanical wizardry was legendary. Gunn had already jury-rigged 20 Havocs with extra guns and bomb racks, turning them into low-level terrors. "We need to hit him where it hurts, up close," Kenny said during their first meeting in a dusty hangar at Eagle Farm Airfield. "Forget the high-altitude nonsense. I want bombers that can strafe, skip bomb, and punch through armor." Gunn nodded, his mind racing. But Kenny's wildest idea came later. What if we mount a 75mm field gun in the nose? Turn the B-25 into flying artillery. The room fell silent. Gunn scratched his head, calculating recoil forces in his mind. It was madness. The gun's kick could exceed 7,000 pounds, enough to stall the plane or rip it apart. But desperation breeds audacity. By late 1942, Gunn set to work in secret workshops, scavenging parts from wrecked artillery pieces and reinforcing the B-25's frame with steel girders. North American engineers, consulted via teletype, were apoplectic. "Impossible," their report read. "Recoil will exceed structural limits by 200%. Pilot fatality certain." Kenny ignored them, betting on Gunn's ingenuity. Back in the hangars of Eagle Farm in Townsville, late 1942 into early 1943, Pappy Gunn and his team of grease-stained mechanics labored under floodlights, the air thick with the smell of welding torches and fresh paint. Gunn, sleeves rolled up, cigarette dangling from his lips, directed the installation of steel braces along the B-25's forward fuselage, beefing up the spars to handle forces no designer had ever imagined. The 75mm M4 cannon, salvaged from a wrecked Army howitzer, lay on a cradle like a sleeping dragon, its 9-foot barrel waiting to be mated to the aircraft's nose. "This baby's gonna punch holes big enough to drive a Jeep through." Gunn growled at his crew, wiping sweat from his brow in the tropical heat. Testing began in secret. On the first ground fire, the recoil bucked the Part B, 25 backwards several feet, tires screeching on the tarmac. Airborne trials were worse. The plane slowed dramatically with each shot, the airframe groaning as if protesting the abuse. Pilots reported the kick felt like slamming into an invisible wall, stalling the engines momentarily and dropping altitude in a heart-stopping lurch. One test pilot, Captain Bill Ben, came back pale, felt like the wings were going to fold up like a cheap umbrella. Gunn tinkered relentlessly, adding hydraulic dampers, redistributing weight with extra armor plates, shortening the barrel slightly for balance. Slowly, the beast tamed, holding together through multiple shots at 200 knots. Word reached the factory in Inglewood, California. North American Aviation's engineers, poring over blueprints in air-conditioned offices, recoiled at the teletype messages from Kenny's staff. Structural failure imminent. One lead designer wired back. Recoil exceeds design limits by 150 to 200%. Wings will shear at the root. Fuselage buckling certain. Recommend immediate cessation. Pilot survival unlikely beyond first discharge. They ran calculations showing the 7,000-pound thrust would crumple the nose like tin foil, send shock waves ripping rivets free, potentially snapping the spar carry-through. This is a modification, the report concluded sternly. This is suicide. Kenny, reading the dire warnings in his Brisbane headquarters, slammed the paper down. Bunch of desk jockeys who've never seen a Jap destroyer up close, he snorted his aides. He trusted Gunn's hands-on genius over slide rules and wind tunnels. The general had seen high-altitude bombing fail time and again, B-17s and B-24s raining death from the stratosphere, only for agile Japanese ships to dance away unscathed. Hit rates against moving targets were abysmal, often under 10%. Meanwhile, low-level attacks with strafers were proving deadly. Gunn's earlier mods, packing 8.50 calibers into the nose of B, 25 CS and DS, turned them into commerce destroyers that shredded barges and troop transports in the Bismarck Sea battle that March. But destroyers were tougher nuts, armored, fast, bristling with guns. Kenny wanted a knockout punch. The 75 millimeters, firing 15-pound high-explosive shells, could theoretically breach hull plating from 1,500 yards, flooding compartments before the ship could maneuver. Gunn's field-modified prototype, AB-25C, stripped of its glass nose, cannon bolted offset to port, proved the concept viable enough for Kenny to push production. By spring 1943, North American reluctantly converted a handful of B-25CS into XB-25GS, then ramped up the full G model. Solid armored nose, 2.50S for sighting, the massive cannon cradled beneath the pilot's feet. The co-pilot seat vanished, replaced by the loader's cram station, manual breech. 21 rounds stowed in racks, hot casings ejecting into the cockpit like molten brass. Crews trained on the new beast, learning to anticipate the recoil. Throttle up before firing, nose down slightly to counter the backward slam. The first factory-fresh B-25GS ferried across the Pacific, arriving in Australia by June 1943. Assigned to the 3rd Attack Group and 345th Bomb Group. Pilots eyed the protruding muzzle warily. Looks like a pregnant goose, one quipped. Ground crews practiced loading drills, the heavy shells requiring 2 men to heft into the breech. Maintenance nightmares abounded. The cannons fouling from black powder residue, alignment issues after hard landings, the constant fear of a hang fire in flight. Yet desperation won out. Japanese convoys still slipped reinforcements to New Guinea, their destroyers escorting like wolves. Kenny deployed the cannon ships forward to Port Moresby, ready for their baptism. Pappy Gunn, now a lieutenant colonel, insisted on flying the first combat test himself. On that fateful July morning, he climbed into the cockpit of the modified prototype, engines roaring to life. The target, a pair of Japanese destroyers spotted off Cape Gloucester, New Britain, arrogant gray hunters ripe for the taking. As the formation skimmed the waves toward the enemy, Gunn felt a familiar thrill. Experts be damned. This was going to work. July 28, 1943. The Huon Gulf glimmers under a rising sun as Major Pappy Gunn pushes the throttles forward on the prototype cannon arm B-25, call sign Lil Fox. Flanked by 2 standard strafers from the 3rd Attack Group for cover, he leads the small formation skimming the wave tops at 240 knots. The target destroyers, identified as the Mitsuki-class Ariake and the smaller patrol craft trailing her, have been caught unloading troops and supplies near Cape Gloucester. Intelligence spotted them at dawn. Now it's time to pounce before they can scatter. Gunn's voice cuts through the intercom, calm as gravel. Remember, boys, getting fast, fire at 1,000 yards, then brake hard. Don't linger for souvenirs. In the nose, Sergeant Hank Thompson braces against a recoil pad, the 75 millimeters loaded with a high-explosive shell, fuse set for instantaneous detonation. The loader, Corporal Mike Russo, crouches beside the rack of 20 more rounds, sweat soaking his shirt despite the slipstream howling through the open bomb bay vents. The plane feels nose-heavy, sluggish compared to a clean B-25, but gun handles it like an extension of his will. The Japanese ships spot them first. Alarm klaxons wail aboard Ariake as lookouts shout warnings. The destroyer's 4.7-inch guns traverse skyward, secondary batteries spitting tracers that stitch the air. Gun jinks left, then right, staying low enough that the heavy guns can't depress far enough to track. At 1,500 yards, the .50 calibers in the escorted B-25s open up, holes in the deck to suppress the anti-aircraft crews. Sailors scatter behind turrets as bullets spark off steel. Gun lines up dead astern. Range 1,800. Thompson calls out. The destroyer's wake boils white behind her screws, the rising sun flag snapping defiantly. Fire! The cannon erupts with a thunderclap that drowns the engines. The recoil slams a B-25 backward, airspeed dropping 40 knots in an instant. Gun shoves the throttles to the firewall. Nose dipping to bleed off altitude and regain flying speed. The shell impacts just forward of the bridge. A massive orange fireball blossoms, hurling debris skyward. The entire superstructure shudders. Secondary explosions ripple along the deck as ready ammunition cooks off. Hit! Direct hit. Russo yells. Gun pulls into a climbing turn, circling for another pass. Ariake slews hard to port, trailing black smoke, but her guns still bark defiance. Tracers whip past the cockpit. One round punches through the starboard wing, leaving a jagged hole. Gun ignores it. Reload, make it quick. Thompson and Russo work in practice frenzy. Spent casing ejected with clang, fresh shell ram home. The second shot roars out at 900 yards, smashing into the waterline amidships. A geyser white water erupts, and when it clears, Ariake is visibly down by the bow, listing 10 degrees. The escorting strafers dive in now, their 8 nose-mounted .50s chewing up the deck, silencing machine gun nests. Japanese sailors leap overboard as fires spread to the torpedo mounts. Gun comes around for the coup de grace. Third shell, direct hit on the aft magazine. The explosion is catastrophic, a blinding flash followed by a pressure wave that rocks the B-25 even at 800 yards. Ariake's back breaks. The stern rises grotesquely before the ship jackknifes and plunges bow first into the depths. Oil and debris spread across the sea. Survivors cling to flotsam as the smaller escort flees at full speed, zigzagging desperately. Gun climbs to 2,000 feet, circling once. Scratch one destroyer. He radios base, voice steady but laced with triumph. The crew whoops over the intercom, Thompson pounding Russo on the back, both grinning like madmen. The plane, battered but intact, wings uncrumpled, fuselage unbuckled, turns for home. Not a single structural failure. The experts were wrong. Word of the kill spreads like wildfire through 5th Air Force headquarters in Port Moresby that afternoon. Kenny, poring over reconnaissance photos in his office, slams a fist on the desk when the report arrives. "By God! Gun did it," he exclaims to his staff. The teletype to Washington is blunt. 75 millimeters B. 25 modifications successful in combat. 1 Japanese destroyer sunk. 0 losses. Recommend immediate acceleration of B-25G production. Back in California, North American engineers read the dispatch in stunned silence. Their dire predictions, wings tearing off, pilot killed instantly, evaporated in the face of cold reality. The recoil had been brutal, yes, but Gun's reinforcements and careful firing technique held the airframe together. The propaganda value alone was immense. American newspapers soon carried headlines. Yank bomber sinks Jap destroyer with giant cannon. Morale soared among air crews who had felt impotent against naval targets. Kenny wasted no time. More B-25 GS were rushed into service with the 345th Bomb Group, the Air Apaches, who painted shark mouths around the cannon muzzle for extra menace. Pilots developed tactics. Approach at mast height, fire 2 to 3 rounds, then break away under covering strafers. Accuracy was astonishing, far higher than any high-altitude bombing. But the cannon ships weren't invincible. Maintenance remained a headache. The guns bore foul quickly in humid conditions, and shell supply was limited. And the Japanese adapted, adding more light AA, coordinating with Zero fighters. The real test would come in the months ahead, as Kenny prepared a larger campaign to isolate Rabaul and choke Japan's supply lines. For now, though, on that July evening, Pappy Gunn nursed Lil Fox back to Durand Airfield, tires chirping on the pierced steel planking. Ground crew swarmed the plane, marveling at the scorch marks around the muzzle, the intact wings. Gunn climbed down, lit a cigarette, and allowed himself a rare grin. The suicide gun had just proven itself the deadliest anti-ship weapon in the Pacific. August 1943 through early 1944. The jungle airstrips of New Guinea and Nadzab hummed with activity as more factory fresh B. 25 GS roll-off transport ships and in the hands of eager crews. The 345th Bomb Group, nicknamed the Air Apaches, takes delivery of a dozen. Their ground crews painting ferocious shark teeth around protruding 75mm muzzle and war cries on the fuselages. Pilots swap stories in the sweltering officers' tents. The cannon's kick still feels like getting rear-ended by a truck, but the results are undeniable. Japanese shipping losses mount. Barges, coastal freighters, even light cruisers caught in harbor take devastating hits from the flying artillery. Yet limitations quickly surface. The single 75mm, manually loaded, allows only 4 to 6 aimed shots per sortie before ammunition runs dry or the bore fouls. The loader station is a hellish sweatbox. Hot casings bounce around the cockpit, burning legs and filling the air with cordite stench. Accuracy suffers if the pilot can't hold steady during the recoil-induced speed bleed. Kenny, ever the innovator, demands more. "We need volume of fire," he tells Pappy Gunn during a late-night briefing in Port Moresby. "Pair the big gun with enough machine guns to chew through decks before the cannon even speaks." Gunn, promoted again and wearing the way to command, collaborates with field modification teams. The result: the B-25H rushed into production by North American Aviation in mid-1943. The H model refines the beast, lighter T-32-75mm cannon with improved recoil absorbers for forward-firing .50 calibers added in blister packs on the lower fuselage cheeks, bringing the total fixed forward armament to 8.50 S plus the cannon. The nose is streamlined, weight redistributed, and the loader gets a slightly less miserable perch. Ammo capacity climbs to 24 rounds, and reliability improves with better venting to clear propellant gases. The first B-25HS arrive in theater in December 1943, just as Kenny prepares his masterstroke, the isolation of Rabaul. The Japanese stronghold on New Britain bristles with over 100,000 troops, supported by a powerful fleet of cruisers and destroyers. Neutralizing it without a costly invasion requires cutting its sea lanes. Cannon ships become the scalpel. Squadrons of the 38th and 345th Bomb Group staged low-level raids on shipping in Simpson Harbor and the Bismarck Sea, coordinated with PT boats and Australian bullfighters. One standout mission, January 22, 1944, over Rabaul. Captain Ralph Chelly leads a flight of 4B-25HS against a convoy attempting to run the blockade under cover of storm clouds. Skimming through rain squalls at 100 feet, they burst upon a pair of destroyers and 3 transports. Chelly's plane, Chelly's Chili, opens fire at 1,200 yards. The 8.50S hammered the lead destroyer's bridge in a continuous roar, silencing AA guns before the crew can respond. Then the 75mm speaks. 3 rapid shots, each slamming into hull below the waterline. The destroyer, later identified as Fumizuki, erupts in steam and flame as boilers rupture, rolling over in minutes. The other HS follows suit, their combined firepower devastating. Transports take multiple hits, settling by the stern as crews abandon ship. Zeros scramble from Rabaul's airfields but arrive too late. The B-25 vanish into the rain, unscathed. Photographic reconnaissance the next day confirms 3 destroyers and 4 merchantmen sunk or crippled. Kenny cables MacArthur. Cannon bombers proving decisive against naval targets. Enemy shipping paralyzed. Losses, though, are not zero. The low-level tactics demand iron nerves. Flak is murderous at mass height, and Japanese fighters grow adept at bounce attacks. On one February sortie, AB-25H piloted by Lieutenant James Lee takes a 20mm round to the cockpit during the cannon run. The recoil masks the hit until too late, and the plane cartwheels into the sea. Crews learn bitter lessons. Always approach in pairs, one suppressing while the other shoots. Never linger for extra shots. Use terrain masking whenever possible. By spring 1944, the cannon ships have sunk or severely damaged over a dozen destroyers and scores of smaller vessels, far outpacing any other Allied anti-shipping platform in theater. The Imperial Japanese Navy pulls its capital ships back to Truk and the home islands, conceding the Bismarck Sea. Rabaul withers under constant bombardment, its garrison starving as supplies dwindle. Pappy Gunn, watching the evolution of his brainchild from a dusty Brisbane hangar, rarely flies combat now. Kenny keeps him grounded for modification work and training. But the old man's legacy soars with every thunderous report of a 75mm over Pacific waters. The experts who once called it suicide now quietly revise their reports. North American builds over 1,000 B-25HS, the most heavily armed medium bomber of the war. As the Allies leapfrog toward the Philippines in mid-1944, the cannon ships prepare for their next hunting grounds. The convoy routes off Leyte and the narrow seas around Formosa. The suicide gun has become the Pacific's nightmare. October 1944. The vast armada of the Leyte invasion stretches across the horizon, but the real battle for the Philippines is fought in the narrow waters of the Surigao Strait and off Samar. Japanese naval remnants stage desperate counterattacks, throwing destroyers and cruisers into night charges against overwhelming American firepower. Kenny's B-25 cannon ships, now operating from muddy strips on Mindoro and newly captured Tacloban, prowl these contested seas like wolves among wounded prey. The B-25HS of the 345th and 38th Bomb Groups fly relentless patrols, armed with a mix of 75mm high-explosive and armor-piercing rounds. On October 25th, during the chaos following the battle off Samar, a flight led by Major John Vickers catches a crippled heavy cruiser Kumano limping northward after Taffy 3's heroic stand. Vickers' formation drops to deck level through scattered rain squalls, evading radar pickets. At 1,500 yards, the 8.50 calibers rake the superstructure, while Vickers himself fires four deliberate 75mm shots. The first two smash into the already damaged bow. The third penetrates an engine room, and the fourth detonates against a secondary turret. Kumano's speed falls off dramatically. Later that day, U.S. Navy dive bombers finish her. Vickers claims a shared kill, but the cannon's contribution is undeniable. Further north, in November and December 1944, the cannon ships shift focus to the Formosa Strait and the China coast. Japanese convoys hug the shoreline, ferrying troops and oil from Singapore to the home islands. Operating from bases in the Philippines, B-25HS stage through Lingayen and strike convoys under the cover of bad weather-that-grounds fighters. One memorable sortie on December 14 sees Captain William Billy Calder and his wingmen surprise the destroyer take off Cam Ranh Bay. Skimming in at 50 feet, they open fire simultaneously. Calder's cannon scores 3 hits in rapid succession. Boiler rooms flooded, the ship dead in the water. Takes crew abandoned ship as secondary explosions tear her apart. Recon photos confirm the kill. Calder earns a Distinguished Service Cross. The toll mounts on both sides. Japanese anti-aircraft improves. 40mm Bofors captured from Singapore, radar-directed 25mm triples. Zeros and Oscars from Formosa bases pounce on returning bombers. On one January 1945 mission, 3B-25HS are lost to a swarm of Ki-44 Toyos. Only one crew is rescued. The heavy forward armament makes the H model sluggish in a turning fight, and the protruding cannon barrel disrupts airflow, limiting top speed. Pilots learn to never climb after an attack. Stay low, use clouds, run for home. By early 1945, the strategic picture shifts. The Imperial Japanese Navy is a shadow, its destroyers expended in suicidal runs at Leyte, its merchant fleet decimated. Convoy traffic dwindles to scattered coasters and junks. Kenny redirects most medium bombers to close air support for ground troops, grinding through Luzon and Okinawa. The 75mm cannon, designed to kill warships, finds fewer worthy targets. Some crews remove the heavy gun entirely, replacing it with additional .50 calibers for strafing Japanese bunkers and supply dumps. Production of the B-25H ends in May 1945. The final examples roll out just as V-Day celebrations echo across the world. Over 1,400 G and H models were built, but only a fraction remain in frontline service by summer. Pappy Gun never sees the war's end. On October 11, 1944, C-47 crashes in bad weather over New Guinea, killing the man who turned a suicide idea into a legend. Kenny devastated. Orders a memorial service attended by hundreds of mechanics and pilots who owed their victories to Gun's wrench and vision. In the war's final months, surviving cannon ships occasionally hunt submarines or pound bypass garrisons, but their glory days are past. When Japan surrenders in September 1945, fewer than 50 operational B-25HS remain in the Pacific. Most are scrapped or abandoned on remote islands, their massive muzzles silent at last. The experts who once predicted ripped wings and dead pilots are left with egg on their faces. The 75mm B-25 sank or crippled at least 18 destroyers for cruisers and scores of merchant vessels, more tonnage per sortie than any other land-based aircraft in theater. It forced the Japanese Navy to abandon daylight convoy operations and contributed directly to the strangulation of Rabaul and the isolation of bypass strongholds. Today, only a handful of restored B-25 survive, none with the original 75mm installation intact. But in the memories of aging veterans and the faded gun camera footage, you can still hear the thunderous roar of that suicide cannon as it tears across the waves, proving that sometimes the maddest ideas win wars.